I want to talk about homelessness in America and what the driving forces are behind it. A lot of the time, there are contributing factors that lead people to be homeless. It's not just one thing. More often than not, it's a combination of things. But in general, it's not having anyone to rely on in your family, or having a health problem or medical condition that makes it burdensome for people in your family when you have those that you can rely on, or friends to take care of you. A lot of your homeless suffer from one or more mental illnesses, sometimes schizophrenia, sometimes bipolar disorder. Sometimes they'll have an antisocial personality disorder that makes them very difficult to relate with other people. And oftentimes, joblessness, or losing their job, or the death of a spouse that can contribute to them not having anything, not having any money, and rising costs of living. People having their rent go up by $50 or $100 overnight suddenly when they're on a fixed income, and being unable to afford the cost to relocate out of that area, even though they essentially have to move out immediately if they can't afford the new rent rate. They get priced out. That's what happens. People in their greed, or seeking to keep their market rate in line with what other people are charging for the same thing in the same area, they price people out and they keep them from being able to stay there. So basically, these people who don't have more than a fixed amount of money they can pay for rent are forced to move out because they can't afford it anymore. And a lot of the time, in the short term, if they have no one to live with, no friends or family to depend on, they end up staying on the street or living in their car. This is especially the case with a lot of young men who get kicked out of their houses, and young women who get kicked out of their houses for either, drugs, but more often than not, and this is going to not surprise some of you, but some of you will surprise it, you'll be real surprised about it. They'll tell their family that they're gay, or that they're a alternate sexual lifestyle practitioner, transgender, homosexual, bisexual. And most of you young people who end up getting put on the street and end up homeless for the short term or sometimes longer, that's the leading factor that leads them to be in those situations. Other than something terrible happening in their family and suddenly they can't pay their bills anymore. That's something else too. When a provider dies and you can't immediately move on and connect with somebody else and move in with them and live with them, you're emotionally or psychologically devastated, or both. It results in a situation where you end up temporarily unable to meet your needs. I've seen this, I've experienced it. And it's not that the person is not sane, it's that they're devastated. And there's no safety nets for those people when that happens. You can go and you can talk to somebody, but in terms of like getting support, monetary support or prescription support to help with the grieving process and things like that, that support is not there. Believe me, it's not. I tried community resources when my wife died, and it was bad. It was really bad. There was almost nothing available out there. But you can survive it. That doesn't mean that you come out of it, okay. In situations like that, you suffer along the way and you lose a lot, generally, when your provider passes away. I only made about 15%, maybe 20% of the household income. My wife made the rest. I put her through school. And so when she died, there was a real fear that we would become homeless. I was really in uncertain, uncharted territory. And Social Security does not provide an adequate safety net for a person to meet all their expenses when they lose a provider. Even though we got onto Social Security, our income dropped by almost $10,000. And we were living within our means where we were at, but all it takes is the right factors to make your home unlivable for you to end up homeless as well. That's another point I wanted to touch on. We got affected by Hurricane Harvey. And we got mold in our home and we couldn't get help remediating it, and homeowners insurance didn't pay. Our deductible was almost $5,000. Remediation was estimated at $11,500. We didn't get any remediation because we couldn't afford the deductible. And in addition to that, the insurance company didn't acknowledge that we had that much water damage to begin with. They didn't do a thorough inspection. They did not go through our attic and look at the plywood that was up there. And what happened is that we ended up not getting coverage for that. And I applied with FEMA too, because I had homeowners insurance. FEMA denied us outright. They didn't give us any help at all. And then they said, well, you have so much time to file paperwork, but I didn't file the paperwork because everything that was going on led me to be under tremendous emotional stress at that time. And simultaneously, in the months immediately following Harvey, I got extremely sick. And so the kids got sick too, because we had developed mold in the house. So I ended up in the hospital, and I lost my job, and I lost my insurance. And I told the job, look, the doctor says I can't return to the same workplace or I'll die, because the respiratory conditions inside the facility will kill me. So they fired me. After almost 9 years cumulatively of working there, they fired me. And I was so sick, and the compensation from the job was so little. They were taking wages from my check that I didn't even, try to go to the EEOC to fight it. When you're laid up and you're really, really ill, like respiratory illness especially, I was incapacitated. I mean, it was literally a challenge for me to even get out of bed and walk to the refrigerator. I felt so tired. I mean, it was like really severe exhaustion. And what ended up happening was, as these consequences accumulated on our situation, and we didn't have the financial capacity to meet the needs and demands that were being placed on us, we gradually got forced out of our home by our circumstances. And I went to charities and nonprofits. I applied with a lot of people and sent out letters. But they didn't care. Even though I was widowed with 2 children, with a name like mine, it was, a white name. I didn't get any help. They didn't understand the situation that we were in, even though I explained it to them. We didn't get any support. And that's how it is for people like me. When you get out there and you're working yourself literally to death, trying to maintain quality of life for you and your family and your children, and then a series of bad things or just one really significant bad thing happens to you, this can lead you to becoming homeless, whether you want to be or not. This is why it's really good to live very, very, very well within your means. And I'm not talking about quality of life, but you don't live at the limit of what you can afford. You live well within the limit. You might choose to live in a place that's not so nice, simply so that you can make sure you can pay your bills every month. You want to stay invisible, you want to fly under the radar, and you want to keep your overhead costs as low as possible. Put a nest egg back, anything you can, so that if anything happens at all, you're not just left completely homeless and in abject poverty, and you got no safety net. Because the system, and this is something a lot of African Americans already know, and Latin Americans as well, the system doesn't take care of people here in the United States. Let me tell you what it does. It devours them and their families. If you're poor, you're far more likely to have your children removed from your home. And if you become homeless, you're even more likely to see your children taken away, simply because you become homeless from circumstances that you couldn't even do anything about. You were a victim of the situation. I kept the same job all while I was married to my wife, and the only time I stopped working was when I went to school. And Despite working extremely hard, trying to help other people, and making a good impression in the workplace for years, nobody cared when this stuff hit me. Nobody cared. After all the time that I was there, people, you know, they took notice that I was gone because I did really great work and I helped people and I was a workplace solution in every situation I was put into. Wherever I could do, I did do. You know, I was giving my all, both at home and at work. But the thing is, though, that when it came time that I needed something back, I didn't get it. I didn't get it from any of them, anybody. And that's what it feels like to be left behind. That's what it feels like not to get the help that you need when you need it. It feels like being abandoned. It's like a deep, deep betrayal, you know, by your employer, by the social welfare system, by society at large, by the institutions that are supposed to be there to function as a safety to prevent you from ending up deeply impoverished, unemployed, uninsured, and then finally homeless. I spent several months without a permanent place to stay with the kids. And we had shelter and we were safe, but stuff happened sometimes, you know, around those places that made me really uncomfortable. Not within my household where we were staying temporarily, but outside I could hear things, I saw things. We had one instance where we were staying somewhere and a vehicle crashed into a staircase outside of this motel and destroyed the stairs. And the crazy thing is that they let the guy come back and stay there again the next day after he got out of jail. And there were people selling, you know, drugs outside because there was a need. People needed to feel better. And the only way that they felt that they could feel better in their circumstances at that time was to do Xanax, or some of them were smoking crack, or they were doing cocaine, you know? And it's not unusual at all. This goes hand in hand with being impoverished and being in a disadvantaged situation. They feel so bad they just want to do anything they can to try to feel better. And some of them start out being victimized in some way or other, and the only way they can cope emotionally and psychologically is to become substance abusers. And that contributes, along with them already being homeless. People judge those people. When they see them and they see that they're doing drugs on the sidewalk, or, you know, in a tent or something, they're shooting up, or they're smoking pot or smoking crack or snorting cocaine. These things, that goes hand in hand with being a victim. It does. People don't understand. When you're seeing a person like that, that person is not doing that because they want to most of the time. They've developed a dependency on that on account of emotional and psychological trauma that they have. And they do that to cope. It's their sole coping mechanism because they're so emotionally or psychologically overwhelmed. They've lost the capacity, at least from their perspective, to be able to deal with their problems any other way. They feel so bad that they're just looking for any out that they can find. Sometimes they even commit suicide. And so, you know, there are a lot of circumstances, obviously, which contribute to homelessness, but we absolutely need a radical and sweeping solution to homelessness. There needs to be affordable, compact housing, even just a small, tiny living space for people to live in. And I have a solution for this, too. I've already thought of something. I've discussed it with people. You know, you could make cargo containers a place for people to live very inexpensively. Cargo containers they use on ships for freight and on trains to transport consumer goods and other valuables across the state and across the country, you know, from the shipping yards that they arrive at. Trains still remain the most affordable way to mass transport consumer goods over land. And boats, same thing, over sea. But I have so much more to say on the issue of homelessness, and it would be far more affordable to institute solutions for that than to continue to deal with things as we have, which is going in and they raid these homeless encampments and they displace the people who are often suffering from medical conditions and mental health problems already. And they put them under even more stress, and they're sending civil servants, they're sending law enforcement to move these people, to threaten them, to get them to go. And what's happening is that they're really not helping them. They're not at all. They're just making their situation worse. The people have to drop whatever they're doing. A lot of them, if maybe they're trying to make their situation better. They're not sitting out there all the time doing nothing. Most of the time, you want to know what they're trying to do? They're walking somewhere to get water or to get food or to hold up a sign that says, hey, anything helps. Give me some money for food. Give me some money for water. You know, give me some money so I can wash my clothing. I'm not saying give me from their perspective. They're asking because they're in a situation that necessitates that they ask for charity because they have very little to no choice. Once you get to that point, you're so deeply disadvantaged that it's almost impossible for you to get out of those circumstances without outside help. You have to have outside help. So, I know that we could solve this problem, but people have to care, and if they don't care, we're not going to be able to solve it. It's something that would be easily remedied. It's not even difficult to fix. You know, it's just a question of, does anybody care enough to try to do anything? Well, I care. I do. Obviously, I wouldn't make these videos if I didn't care. I share my perspective and my insights on these things because I want people to understand. You know, most people who see a homeless person outside, they'll avoid them. They won't stop, they won't talk to them, but instead of sending law enforcement, send social workers to help the person out. Send them with a car. Pick the person up, you know. Have them get in the car and just take them somewhere where they have their own little tiny living space with air conditioning and basic phone service, you know, access to laundry facilities that they don't have to pay for, electricity, running water, a hot plate to cook on, you know, at least one burner that's electricity powered or something, you know. Obviously no flames. There's a lot of different reasons why you don't want fire in a place that is like that. But there's so many affordable solutions that we could put in place, and what it all comes down to is that people just don't give a damn. They don't care about these people. They don't understand that that person is in those circumstances a lot of the time because somebody put them there. All the various exploitation and victimization they went through led them to be in that situation. They didn't choose that life. That was something that was imparted on them. You know, you grow up in an abusive home and you turn into a dysfunctional adult as a result of the circumstances that you were living in. It messes you up emotionally and psychologically. And I don't mean that in a way that's derogatory or negative. I mean to say that that person's been harmed, and they aren't going to get better without outside help. They can't do it. So, just as poverty is institutionalized, so too is homelessness in most cases. And a lot of your, you know, conservatives, Republicans are going to be absolutely opposed to hearing that. They don't even want to accept that it's the individuals, you know, who are more victims than by choice. They end up in those circumstances. If they could help themselves, most of the time, believe me, they would. I see people walking all the time. They're just simply going to the gas station to fill up a water jug so they can have water to drink or shave their face, you know. And that's the whole thing. People do what they have to do to survive. They don't choose that way of living. They do what they have to do because those are the circumstances they're dealt. And a lot of the time, you can't control for the circumstances you're placed in. You know, once you get to a certain point of disadvantage, you're just along for the ride. That's really the truth of the matter.